On February 25th, we'll ask if Diamondback's ability is sharp enough to cut through or if she'll miss the mark. I'll revisit Redwing, break down unique Diamondback decks at each series, and see if Nimrod and Phoenix Force are still powerhouses. Overall consensus on Redwing is he is at best a mid card, not great by any stretch. One thing that happened in between the time I originally recorded the Redwing preview and now is that he got a +1 in power, so he's a 3/4 now. And ultimately, I don't think that was enough. He goes in a handful of decks, Dracula Dump, regular move, and honestly, I think regular move is Redwing's best spot. Otherwise, this is kind of an easy pass in my mind. If you like some of the decks you've seen with him and you're gonna play Redwing decks a lot, of course, get it, that goes for any card. But otherwise, this just is not powerful enough to warrant spending your keys or tokens on. This is the entire Spotlight week. Diamondback, of course, leans into Negative Affliction. And then we have Nimrod and Phoenix Force, who are lesser used cards. They are both Series 4, so they're 3,000 tokens if ultimately you decide to go that way. And of course, we'll dive into each of them individually. So there are a lot of synergistic cards at this point that work with Diamondback. From the early series, we have something like Scorpion, who of course has been around forever. And then later, it's some of the cards that go in an Ajax type build. Hazmat is one. And then there's also high Evo type decks, which are more accessible. Once you get high Evo, you have its own built-in deck. So there's a lot of synergies. Of course, you need synergies with this card. Because it only has 3 power at 3 cost, it is ultimately a good powered card overall as far as total power goes, just because you are inflicting even more damage as your opponent fills up their board or as you fill it up for them. And so this does have some interesting components if you like Negative Affliction style decks. If you don't, then there probably isn't much here for you. But overall, she's an interesting card to me, and let's get into her decks. This is the Series 2 Theory Crafted version. If you are still Series 2, pass on this card. Do not get her. The Series 2 deck just doesn't have options. There's Scorpion and Spider-Woman, so you really need higher series cards to take advantage of Diamondback. Otherwise, we're going with more of an Odin on reveal style deck. There's a Hobgoblin in here just for some disruption, put -8 on your opponent's side of the board. Scorpion, of course, does his thing, which is amplified by Diamondback. So potentially in one lane, you have Diamondback and Spider-Woman, and then whatever Scorpion cards they've played there. And then in another lane, you have Rocket Raccoon, Medusa, Ant-Man, and then Odin to re-trigger all of that in the middle lane. But overall, the Diamondback Series 2 version just isn't worth talking about too much, so let's move on to the Series 3 version. Okay, so let's continue the trend of this being a theory-crafted deck, because there's a mash of ideas in here, competing ideas potentially, and I'm not sure which ultimately wins out. So, there is Move Disruption, which I think benefits from Diamondback potentially, because you have Kingpin. Not in this deck, you have Scream. Scream? Sure, Scream. And that Move Disruption package, because you have Negative Affliction built in already, you can amplify that with Diamondback and just put lanes even more over the top. Of course, I've thrown in Scorpion and Hazmat. Debris, just to give targets for that Hazmat, even more targets for Hazmat. And Rogue is here for tech. If Diamondback becomes super popular, we're going to see a lot of Luke Cage. But also, Rogue is just a decent tech card. We, of course, have cards that move other cards, Polaris and Juggernaut. Miles Morales Spider-Man benefits from some of that movement. And then Magneto to finish things off. I'm not sure that this iteration of this deck is great, but there are enough good ideas here where you can take it into a game, see what's working, see what's not, and adjust it based on your own collection level. So sometimes it's good to look to the future when you are unlocking new cards. So I think the Moonstone and Diamondback pairing is pretty strong and significant, because now those two might just be able to solo a lane if you can do a Hazmat, a Scorpion, and then Selene. Like there's a lot here where, and the Selene can work with Hawkeye Kate Bishop's arrow, acid arrow. There's a lot working for it here. Bullseye makes an appearance. This is inspired by my High Evo Bullseye deck, which is a different use of Bullseye than maybe you're accustomed to seeing outside of this channel. And so I have a number of 1 costs. I have 3 of them total here, but also Hawkeye Kate Bishop provides another 2. M'Baku, listen, M'Baku's a fun card.
These men should be ashamed!
And by throwing him away with Bullseye, you get value. If he's in your deck, you get value. Fantastic. So this is an Ajax deck by and large. With Hope Summers, that could be Luna Snow or some other energy cheat type of card. Maybe even a Sarah to enable you to play a Hazmat and an Ajax together on the last turn. So this deck, I would be really curious to seeing if there's any merit here. And this is probably a deck that's almost likely going to be very unique to this channel. Good old Nimrod. You will hear people disrespect him.
I just come to let y'all know, stop, put some respect on my name.
But I am not one of those people. One of my favorite decks of all time, and I'm creeping into the next card, is this Phoenix Force deck. There is a somewhat recent video, maybe a couple of weeks ago, that I made on this specific deck that has both Nimrod and Phoenix Force in it. And I use this thing to do everything in the game that I want to. And Nimrod is a big part of that. Combined with Shuri, you can get him to 12 power and just shoot them all over the board with destroying effects, and it's just fantastic. So I think Nimrod is a good card in this specific deck. Once you get outside and go to more of the destroyer type path or just pure destroy only, the decks typically can't put up enough power. So if you get Nimrod, ultimately I think he only fits in 1 deck, which, to be objective, it probably makes him a bad card, and there needs to be some kind of buff, but I don't know what you really do here with him. So if you get him, he fits in 1 deck in my mind, and that's it. And so let's move on to Phoenix Force. Phoenix Force is another card that people do not respect.
Put some respect on my name.
But this is my favorite card in the whole game, believe it or not. So if you think I have bad takes sometimes, well, here's another one. So this card is just fantastic. There's a lot of interesting uses for it. Again, I will reference that deck that I created maybe a year and a half ago at this point, more or less. And I've refined it, and now it's at a spot where it's just the perfect 12 cards in my mind. Phoenix Force is a big part of that. And it can just enable one of these winning lines with this deck, and it's fantastic. Once you learn how the deck operates and learn how to snap and retreat with it, it's just perfect. A lot of people have issues with it, so I'm not in the majority probably, but Phoenix Force is, to me, an untouchable card. You should be happy if you get it. You better be happy if you get it.
You and I were meant to be together.
So will Nerd Dynamite be unlocking Diamondback? Yes, I will. Now, when I got Moonstone specifically to pair with Diamondback. So that's why I think when discussing some of these card releases, it's very important to talk about the upcoming releases, the leaks that have happened, just so you can properly make a informed decision rather than the cards that are in the game now. Because of how Marvel Snap is designed, the release schedule, we're constantly getting new cards. You need to know what those new cards are to make a good decision. So, That is why I got Moonstone specifically for Diamondback, so I will be trying that theory crafted deck and trying to refine it and making a video on it, ideally, if it's any good.
Your decks stink.
But yeah, I think Diamondback will be a pretty strong card. I like playing Negative Affliction sometimes, so I will use the card, and it will just be nice having in my collection. Another thing I didn't mention pairing is with Anti-Venom. Getting her to 0/0, that's fine, because you're still negatively afflicting or adding to that negative affliction in the lane you play her in, and it's just a complete surprise. So I think there's going to be quite a bit of creative combos in the affliction space for her to shine. So before we get into the recap, I'd like to thank everybody that watches this deep into the video and my members. They're a growing list. Am I peeking over enough? And yeah, just thank you so much for all of the support. Now, to get to the recap, Diamondback is a good card, as you heard. I think she's interesting, and she will have an impact and will be annoying if you are on the receiving end. Nimrod is a good card because it's my channel, so do not disagree with me.
Your channel stinks. Unsubscribe.
And then Phoenix Force is just the love of my life. She can do no wrong, and she is the best card in the game. And we will dive into each of... Good old Nimrod. You will hear people put... That's it. So we... What the...